Again, it's the last scheduled session of the day, if I'm reading my agenda correctly. I may not be, but it's certainly towards the end of a long day here. We're going to be talking about Hope and RAN again, but a little bit different this time. It's a little bit, so we have two speakers. Somebody from the O-RAN Alliance is going to speak first, somebody from TIP going to speak second. We'll introduce them in a moment. We then have a little panel session afterwards with, I say a little panel session, we have quite a few speakers, but not much time, so it's a little in that sense. And so we're going to run through that. In the panel, when we come to that, and in fact, even after the speakers have come, if you do have a question, please ask. You know, I've done, on purpose, I've done no preparation for this panel, so that, you know, that we can get some more interaction with the audience and just get a bit different diversity of views and riff off some of the things we hear about. So, the first speaker is going to be Enku from the O-RAN Alliance. We'll then hear from Dave Hutton from Telecom Infra project. So with that, Enku, if you're around, could you come to the stage? Time is there, clicker's there. Welcome.
I can use either one, or either one works, sir.
There you go.
All right, so team, thanks for joining this session. My name is Ku. I work for Keysight as a head of standards and solution strategy. But today, my purpose here is really to represent O-RAN Alliance, to share with everyone here the progress we've actually made as an alliance for the past years up till now, and then the next steps. So O-RAN Alliance, I think as everyone knows, were established back in February 2018, Mobile World Congress Barcelona, when we kicked off O-RAN Alliance, and today we have 31 operators on board and more than 330 members just across the ecosystem, ranging from academia, application developers, chipset providers, cloud providers, hyperscalers, network equipment manufacturers, operators, research institutes, and security providers, and as well as service providers, integrators, test and measurements, and transport network vendors. So basically, every component across the ecosystem, we have members on board contributing to the work that we're doing over in Alliance, and it's really exciting. And obviously, this is a growing number, a very committed team. So just one slide to basically look at what we do in O-RAN Alliance. Our core mission is to develop world-class specifications, multi-vendor interoperable O-RAN specifications, right, for commercial deployments. And to date, we have published 87 specifications and more than 321, technical documents from all the working groups. So O-RAN Alliance today, we have 11 working groups, I believe 3 focus groups, and then we're all going back to the TSC and then the EC team, and there's obviously a board, a governing board. And the revisions, right? So this 87 specifications will include, technical test specifications, and obviously with revisions, right, to them. So test specifications, we've been having multiple test specifications for conformance, interoperability, and end-to-end testing. Again, Open Front Hall is one of them, but we're starting to get conformance test specifications, for example, from Working Group 2, 3, which are basically responsible for the near real-time rig, non-real-time rig, areas. In terms of open testing and integration centers, the OTICs, O-RAN Alliance today have 7 approved OTICs globally, and then more are coming online. So they are basically in process right now. From the awards and recognition perspective, O-RAN has started the certification and badging scheme. A few months ago, we have announced that 2 O-RAN radio unit vendors with specific radio units, they've actually been awarded certificates because they've actually went through a robust pre-certification testing exercise that they've passed more than 30 test cases, conformance test cases related to the Open Front Hall across control user synchronization management plane. So this is a big progress, obviously. Now we got the first 2, more in progress. We have as well the O-RAN software community, which is basically a pilot vehicle for O-RAN to be implementing the latest and greatest specifications from O-RAN Alliance. And the G release has pretty much is targeted to be completed in December timeframe. and the H release is just starting out right now in terms of planning. Again, this is more like a pilot vehicle for ORAN Alliance, right, to implement parts of the specifications and demonstrating the possibilities with 3 open labs right now, basically in operation. The ORAN Plugfest is a way for the ecosystem, players to really get together. It started in 2019, and right now we're basically going through the 5th Plugfest. At the moment, it's called the 4 Plugfest. Again, I'll show you a chart whereby the team has actually made tremendous progress over the past years, starting from 2019 to where we are at today in terms of the number of companies, the maturity of the products, right? Basically, the vendors are bringing to the Plugfest and the evolution of the demonstrations that we're able to show. So on this chart here, right, this is basically what we have in terms of 3 key elements. One is basically in terms of the Plugfest. Like I said, we started back in 2019. There were like 35 companies that participated in 2 venues in China and the United States. In 2020, the number grew up to 58 companies in 4 venues, so China, Japan, Europe, India, and the United States. What's actually interesting is that back in 2020, we started to have a joint Plugfest together with TIP. So ORAN Alliance and joint Plugfest in the Europe venue. And then 2021, the number went up to 94 across 7 venues, adding to Taiwan and South Korea to the hosting venues. And then due to the overwhelming sort of response for the Plugfest, in 2022, we have we have basically increased the frequency of the Plugfest to 2 per year or twice per year. So earlier this year, we concluded the Spring Plugfest. It was 50 companies participated across 3 venues. And then in 4, we now have about 80 companies across 6 venues. So if you look at what we have together as a team across the globe, the momentum for vendors bringing their solution, starting from pre-standards to standards compliance, products, right, demonstrating a multitude of use cases and different possibilities is really increasing. And then for the open test integration centers, like I mentioned, we have about 6 OTICs that were approved in 2021, and then 2022, we have 1 OTIC that recently got approved. So just within a period of less than 2 years, right, 7 OTICs, and this number is going to continue to grow. OSC Labs, 1 is actually based in Asia Pacific in Taiwan, I believe, and then there's 1 in North America, East Coast, and another 1 in North America, West Coast. So within a few years, ORAN Alliance has really built a core set of specifications that supports multi-vendor interoperability, and as well as the enabling components that basically allow us to be able to demonstrate the possibilities and really prove maturity. So we have obviously a very robust, like I said, right, set of contributors across many companies. And then we got to a point earlier this year that we decided that we really want to be able to put together what we call the minimum viable process. Myself, I'm a co-chair of a team. It's called the Minimum Viable Community Process Plan Community, that we're helping ORAN Alliance to prioritize the specifications and the features that operators are most interested in really purchasing and deploying. And this is really important for us because we started ORAN Alliance. I think some of you may have the background. The XRAN Forum was actually working on the front haul specifications. We brought it into ORAN Alliance, and that basically forms the foundation of ORAN Alliance. Then we added many other groups, right, that does, AI, ML, near real-time RIG, non-real-time RIG, SMO, cloud, XHOS, and other things, right, and security, obviously. But over time, we really got to try to, understand from the industry what are the most compelling use cases, business case, which is going to be pivotal to support the strategy of the operators. So the inputs of the MVP process basically includes, taking, inputs from the operators. For example, recently, we've been getting a lot of feedback from the operators from the last survey that we conducted, that we're asking for inputs from the operators. What would be really important for you to be able to deploy Open RAN? And one of the top ranking items came back to be energy savings for Open RAN. So from this process, we're able to basically garner support from the entire community and put together a plan that basically involve, right, features and phases that are basically, phased into releases across different areas. So especially, for example, continuous, enhancements to disaggregation, smart capacity coming down to, utilizing AI/ML for optimization, cloudification for vertical disaggregation, zero-touch automation, security with DevSecOps, Business model innovations, I'll cover some of this later on, but sustainability is what I'm actually referring to in terms of how to really engineer and design specs for a multi-vendor interoperable green ORAN, and the entire framework for analytics around AI/ML. So then from the process, we basically break them down into the working groups, the focus groups, and the task groups to develop a cohesive set of specifications that can deliver the needs of the operators. I think that's really important, right? So this really pulls the whole thing together. So getting into a little bit of details in terms of what we're doing now for future planning. Like I said, this is a holistic approach to really look at, when operators want certain features, right, coming into, for example, energy savings or disaggregation enhancements, what exactly do we need to deliver at a certain point in time based on the job process that we develop, and not having something within 2 years, 3 years down the road, but from an incremental, build, develop perspective, right? How do we design specs that can deliver cohesive specifications across multiple groups within ORAN Alliance for commercial grade implementation? And then the disaggregation enhancements, just to share some highlights with you. There are very robust discussions in ORAN Alliance about front-haul uplink improvements for multi-user MIMO, for example, deployments, optimization around the cloud, different accelerator profiles to be able to support a diversity of accelerators when they're deployed in cloud environments for specific use cases. Smart capacity, we have a very robust exercise, right, going through AI/ML-enabled massive MIMO optimization. That includes, right, grid or beam, non-grid or beams, beam mobility robustness optimization, layer 1, layer 2 beam optimization, or management, you name it. In terms of business models innovation, what's really key to the operators are key features like shared ORU, AI/ML-enabled RAN slicing, the management and assurance of the RAN slices, a zero-touch network automation. Every operator would require a robust implementation of network automation, and as well as O&M to be able to deploy Open RAN. So we look at the fault management, the performance management, the configuration management, topology inventory, and other things, right, including intent-driven management to really simplify the management of the radio access network, especially when it comes to multi-vendor interoperability. Sustainability is a big one. How do we actually make use of AI/ML to enable energy savings? There are different sub-use cases for cell on-off, carrier reconfiguration to standardize a standard approach for advanced sleep modes and cloud optimization. For example, make use of the different advanced power management states of the CPUs to be able to save energy when you can save them. And then RAN analytics, how do we expose the information, right? 3GPP has some ways to do it. ORAN Alliance with multi-vendor interoperability, exposing information, computer analytics, including location, positioning information, and really advancing towards end-to-end network automatic intelligence and governance. Security, this is a big threat, is owned by one full working group. Things like threat analysis, requirements, protocols for ORAN interfaces, network functions, and open source software traceability. So we can go through more details if you're interested after this session, but these are some of the highlights. And from a use cases perspective, today in ORAN Alliance, we're very focused on telco use cases. So this is the current state, and we're expecting to continue to obviously make sure that we are laser focused and aligned to what the operators are wanting ORAN Alliance to develop specifications for Open RAN. Moving forward, right, there are some discussions coming up in terms of how do we make sure that we can actually evolve, right, Open RAN to be able to support the industry verticals requirements. This is going to be a space whereby we believe, many of us, right, in ORAN Alliance believe that we're going to be growing ORAN into a different space. And this is going to be creating tremendous opportunities for the operators as well. So over the next few years, I think this is really about evolving our process to be able to make sure that we take care of the current key use cases, but we plan for the highest profile use cases that includes dedicated industry automation networks. From a test and integration perspective, this is obviously one of the other cornerstones for ORAN Alliance, right? With disaggregation, multi-vendor interoperability, you need to look at how we integrate them together. So today, we have test specifications, as I mentioned, that cover conformance of the interfaces to make sure that all the ORAN products, they're basically compliant to the ORAN specifications from interfaces perspective. and then interoperability between two devices under test, end-to-end testing, basically multi-vendor components like vendor A, B, C providing RU, DU, CU, etc. The evolution of the test specifications is going to start to look at obviously the increased coverage of test cases across different working groups like AML. How do we look at training, testing, validating in a realistic environment other than the basic conformance, but as well as to be able to extend to features and use cases, right? So for example, we look at one of the use cases we spoke about before, massive MIMO optimization. How do we have a set of cohesive specifications or test specifications across all the working groups that look at testing the RU in isolation, the DU in isolation, and then end-to-end with the rigs and the applications to make sure that the test specifications would holistically test the feature in completeness. That's something that we're trying to put together, and obviously the use cases. And with the energy savings use cases, many of us has been speaking about, today we look at testing control user synchronization management plane. And now with energy efficiency, energy savings coming into the picture in a big way for ORAN Alliance, what about the energy plane, right? So we speak about energy plane a lot because we think that this is going to be one of the key matrices that's going to be pivotal to the success of Open RAN. From the awards and recognition perspective, today we have certificates, right, that can be issued by the OTICs, obviously approved by ORAN Alliance, for conformance testing. Badging for interoperability, again, this is speaking about ORAN Alliance award recognition schemes and badging from end to end. The intent is definitely to be able to award more certificates and new badges, but to be able to extend, right, the badging mechanism and potentially certification to features and use cases. When we specify a particular feature that goes across different components within the network, they will need to make sure that they have the corresponding test specifications to support those as well. From an open testing integration center perspective, like I said, today there are 7 approved, 2 in Asia, 4 in Europe, 1 in North America. They are basically more in process and coming online. If you're a member of ORAN Alliance, potentially you would know where these new OTICs are coming up. And then from an open RAN software community perspective, I've mentioned that earlier in my previous slides already. PlugFest, this is one that is going to be evolving into something which is, we think, right, we started with the PlugFest in 2019, and at that time, I think, it was still early, and we're having a lot of challenges in terms of getting basic conformance test cases to run, and as well as to be able to put 2 devices together, what we call the co-integration. It wasn't really working out. Now, as we start to look at moving into the current PlugFest and the future PlugFests, it goes beyond, right, just demonstrating what is actually documented in the specifications. But to be able to take it beyond into cases whereby, pre-standards demonstration, demonstrating the possibilities of what ORAN is able to do, these are some of the directions that we're working on at the moment, as well as deployment readiness. And then from a ORAN and TIP collaboration perspective, obviously, through the presentation this week, you have heard very good news about the collaboration between TIP and Open RAN, defining a framework in terms of leveraging specifications, from a testing perspective about cross-recognitions and joint PlugFest, which has been happening for quite a few years already. I think moving forward, as I discussed in my previous panel, the intent is to be able to explore synergies with requirements and planning. So moving upstream, and obviously, I think in terms of the leverages of the specifications would continue. So some of the concluding remarks. I would say ORAN Alliance continue, right, to obviously develop world-class specifications. I think that is the core of our mission. And as I've mentioned earlier on, it's really about, so when you develop specifications, you want to be able to develop vehicles as well to be able to demonstrate the possibilities of the specifications, especially the test specs, the OTICs, to allow basically vendors and operators to be able to get together to perform collaborative testing, the certification and badging mechanism to be able to get some basic assurance in terms of whether or not, right, the products are basically implemented in conformance or compliance to the specifications, and from a functional performance, security, and energy efficiency, energy savings perspective. And then all these areas are basically coming together that will help us to develop more robust specifications. On point number 2, as I said, we started ORAN Alliance with a lot of contributions from multiple companies. And recently, O-RAN Alliance has decided to form the MVP process, that we start to look at really making sure that we can engineer the process, fine-tune the process for specifications development, to be focusing on the most important areas, strategic areas which are aligned to operator requirements and strategy. That's really key to us, so that there are many things which are going on, but end of the day, I think we really need operators to be able to deploy in the current spaces for telco use cases, and as well as for new use cases which are basically emerging. And then the test integration has been one of the key focuses and discussion for this week. He has been really planning to accelerate the O-RAN's innovation, deployment readiness. So we talked a lot about many things around conformance, interoperability, end-to-end testing. I think the testing integration effort from now moving forward is going to be speaking a lot about the efficiency of the energy usage, and as well as the deployment readiness. How do we bridge the gap between what we have now and moving into really helping operators to roll out their deployments with Open RAN? And with the last note, I just want you to know that obviously this is known to everyone, that O-RAN Alliance is open for all members to participate, and we welcome you to join us in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Koo. Great overview. Brilliant timekeeping. Does anyone have a question for Koo? Must be somebody. Even that person with a stiff shoulder who's at the back, I'm going to take that as a raised hand. So you know. All right, well, come on. Look, he's even bought the mic. I tell you, he didn't really have a question, so I have a question for you. A couple, actually. One thing, do you ever feel like a really big and impressive work plan, do you ever feel like you've bitten off more than you can chew, to use a food analogy, other than it's a British phrase? What started with XRAN as an open front haul interface and the idea that RAN would be programmable, now you have this vast and expanding work program. Does it ever feel like you're taking on too much, that you can't fulfill it, or it's just growing and growing and growing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think right now, for many of us who work in O-RAN Alliance, I think you can probably tell that we have many meetings ongoing, and we are developing a lot of specifications like crazy. And right now, the whole industry is feeling that we need to be able to get into a sustainable mode, right? We started running off like a 50-meter sprints, right? And then there are many more 50 meters, and now the team is starting to think that we need to start to look at planning how we run a marathon, right? How do we actually get towards success, right, in a more sustainable fashion? And I think we can do that with a robust process. So the MVP process is a beginning, right, but it's not the end. It's still very young. This team, right, basically got formed to address this challenge. There are many contributions coming up, and some of them, they are basically cohesive, right? Like, for example, Working Group 4, Front Hall, will start to work on some work items, and then that will be linked to maybe some impacts, right, coming from other working groups, like Working Group 2, Working Group 3 for the non-real-time rig, real-time rig. And I think for us, in order to be able to make sure that we can deliver the results that the industry needs, is really to be able to pull all the requirements together and put it inside the process, and start to look at prioritizing and deprioritizing the things that we're actually working on as an industry. So it's not that all the vendors, including my company, your company, will get what you want, right, within the O-RAN specifications, kind of like development engine. But end of the day, we didn't come up with a funnel and a pipeline of key features and specifications that is going to benefit us as a whole from an ecosystem perspective. Because if you don't start doing that, I think we'll be overwhelmed. Yeah. So I'll just leave it at that note, right? And I think maybe a heads up, I think for members of the O-RAN Alliance, early next year, we may be planning on an event, right, that we can potentially help to address some of these challenges. So just want to leave it at that note. He just
touched his eyebrow, so he's got a question. And then one there. So do we have a microphone? But also you could say it and I'll repeat it. If we have a mic, here we are.
I was just wondering, how do you see the relationship between O-RAN and TIP? Talked a lot about interoperability testing and integration testing. TIP is also designing interoperability testing and integration testing and leading to MVPs. I mean, what's the relationship there? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so that's another really good question. In fact, I've mentioned in my previous panel that I wear 3 hats. I work for Keysight, obviously. My second hat, I'm a MVPC co-chair with O-RAN Alliance. My third hat is that I work with David. I work for David. as a test and integration project group co-chair in TIP. So I'm left hand, right hand, right? ORAN Alliance, TIP, and then Keysight on top. So I would say they are very, very complementary, right? So ORAN Alliance focus on multi-vendor interoperability. Everything related to multi-vendor interoperability, right, to us is really core to develop world-class standards. And then TIP focuses on productization, right? You can have all the specifications in the world, but you need to be able to take vertical slices of all the specifications and say, these are the most important blueprints which are important for the operators. For example, for rural networks, right, for macro, maybe massive MIMO deployments in the C-bands, or maybe for industry, smart manufacturing use cases. These are the blueprints that we need to be able to develop products, right? You start to get the ecosystem, especially for the smaller vendors, to come together and say, if I develop my ORU, my ODU, my OCU, based on the blueprint requirements, then I can actually put myself on SKU, right? You get all the badges you need, you pass all the test cases, you get all the recognition, and then to be able to really jump on the bandwagon, right, and get deployed. So to me, they're highly complementary. ORAN Alliance is never going to get into the productization testing of conformance, interoperability, end-to-end testing, but TIP is going to help us do that. So they're highly complementary. I'm not sure whether that answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Okay, and there's another gentleman there with a question. Let's not have it all the men asking the questions.
Hello.
Hello.
Fyuz from Intel. I'd like to ask you if there are any plans for ORAN Alliance to adopt 6G specifications, and when's that going to happen, if at all?
Oh, you mean, okay, so I think your question is that when would potentially ORAN Alliance develop 6G specifications? So I think we actually had an earlier session today, right, on NGRG, that's Next Generation Research Group. It's a new initiative that recently got kicked off in ORAN Alliance. So I think it's common knowledge to everyone today that no one really knows what 6G is, right? And from an ORAN Alliance perspective, we are not just waiting for the 6G standards to appear. Obviously, I think everyone may agree that ORAN Alliance has actually built a very good building blocks, right, with all the concepts that we've actually put in place that would be fundamental components, right, that would actually make its way to 6G. But within ORAN Alliance, we've decided to take a very, very careful approach, right? We started off with a research group initiative. It's called NGRG, Next Generation Research Group, and with 5 research streams. So looking at number 1, the use cases and the standards gaps, right? To be able to look at not reinventing the wheel, but leveraging from all the industry knowledge that everyone has actually built and focusing on the ones that really matter to ORAN Alliance, and then breaking this down into research stream 2, to the architecture. Then you have AI/ML, security, and research platforms. So right now, I believe the plan is to be able to break this down into 3 phases into the approach, and I think the ORAN Alliance definitely intend to be able to evolve right alongside with 6G standardization, and it's going to be a part of it. So I think the detailed timelines, we can try to discuss this later on, but ORAN Alliance is definitely working on it. But like I said, Troy, ORAN Alliance is not going to be, within ORAN Alliance, we're not looking at, doing this by ourselves, right? We're not about reinventing the wheel. We're really about collaborating and to be able to make sure that, everyone is actually right, into this evolution into 6G. Right, thanks.
Okay, good stuff. So, Ku, are you around for the next bit, like if people want to talk to you?
Oh, yeah, for sure, yes.
So Ku's here. With that, to move it on, we actually have 3 of his colleagues joining us on the panel anyway from the ORAN Alliance point of view. So with that, let's give Ku a round of applause and David Hutton a round of applause as a welcome. David, of course, you're going to introduce yourself. Clock's down here. One thing I'm hoping to find out now is how one of your badges is different to one of his badges, and sort that out for us.
Oh,
Once
we'll definitely clarify that. In fact, I was just going to let Ku continue with my presentation because he did such a good job answering the other questions as well in terms of how we work and align together anyway. But great. This is the last session of the Open RAN Summit. I think it's been a 2-day event. I think it's been fantastic. I don't know what you think, but I know that this is the last session as well. And as usual, we're the speakers who are on before us and happy hour. So I'm shamelessly going to go through these slides pretty quickly, and then let Gabe handle the rest of it as well. So my name is David Hutton. I'm the chief engineer of TIP. I think it's important to clarify right up front the difference between what ORAN Alliance does and what TIP does. As Ku said, ORAN Alliance is the standards body who's looking at developing ORAN. TIP doesn't do standards. We're not a standards body. We do a lot of stuff on Open RAN. We do a lot of stuff on other access technologies as well, such as Wi-Fi, fixed broadband, core network, etc. But we're here to talk about Open RAN today. What we are focused on is doing productization. So after the standards, even in the traditional model, before disaggregation was even spoken of, standards would be developed to achieve interoperability, to create interfaces to make sure that you can have a multi-vendor type of deployment. And when those standards are complete, an operator would speak to a vendor on a bilateral basis and say, okay, I want you to conform to these standards, and I want you to test against those, but I also want these features, and I want to profile what your product gives to me for my type of deployment. And that's the same type of productization that TIP is trying to achieve in a disaggregated world. If we were to try and do the same thing in a disaggregation approach, operators trying to do this on a bilateral basis would be very, very difficult because there are many more vendors that you need to work with. The vendor community is probably a little bit more fragile to support multiple different configurations from how many different operators are there now, about 600 different operators around the world. So to try and centralize and combine as much as possible the baseline of product requirements that you need to support an Open RAN system, and to show how you can combine and do a baseline level of testing against that, not only helps the operators to save them in terms of the resources, the time, and the cost that they need to put to their own integration testing and system-level testing, it also helps the vendors because it helps them to evaluate what they need to prioritize in their own R&D roadmap, and it eliminates a number of different SKUs and different variants of products that they would need to support for every single different operator and a different level of engagement with that as well. So we're trying to centralize those different types of components and accelerate into market, and that's really what TIP's focus is, getting Open RAN into market. So we have a strong industry ecosystem. We were founded in 2016. We have over 600 total participants, over 100 different service providers, and different vendors, OEMs. We have academia, we have hyperscalers, we have security experts, we have lab hosts, we have a number of different participants within our ecosystem. So we feel that we have a very strong approach to be able to drive the whole disaggregation ecosystem moving forward. And what have we done? So over 150 different trials and deployments in over 40 different countries. And this is really, again, focusing on getting equipment into market. Let me just say that the work that the ORAN Alliance is doing as a standards body and doing conformance testing to those standards is absolutely 100% essential to achieve interoperability and integration. It forms the basis of what we do within Open RAN because we reference the work that they do. So I could have taken the easy option and say, what is coming next for TIP? It's everything that Ku said, because what he talked about standardization, we will productize and we will put into the market. That's our focus. So there's another aspect to what we've been delivering to date throughout this year, and it's called TIP Academy. So it's one thing to develop the technical work, but there's another thing that you need to do to upskill talent, whether that be in your operator organization or in a system integrator organization or in universities, to make sure that people are coming out with the right skills to be able to deploy and operate disaggregated technology. So TIP Academy has been launched within TIP with support from Accenture, from Vodafone, from Meta, but it's really about defining a curriculum of work, and it started off with Open RAN, launched in May this year, to get input from the industry experts who understand this, to contribute and share that level of knowledge with people who don't yet have it, so we can help to upskill the community moving forward. And this is a big thing that we think is going to work out very, very well. We're going to expand that curriculum beyond just Open RAN to things like open optical and packet transport and Wi-Fi and other aspects as well. So something to look out for coming up in the next year as well. So what's next? I mean, the whole session today is what's cooking, right? So what's next? What should we look out for in the next year? I think our panel are going to be great to talk about some of the highlights that they've seen in the show in the last couple of days and what they think is going to be important that you should look out next for. But from a tip perspective, we'll go through where we're going to be focusing our major efforts in the upcoming year as well. So this is our kind of like end-to-end life cycle. This is what we do. So these are the main important aspects for us within TIP. And it starts at the beginning here. And if you think even before this ideate phase, that's where the standards work happens. And that's when it finishes, and that's when we come up and say, right, so standards are complete, but what does the market demand now? What do the operators, the consumers of this technology, what do they want to deploy? Because there's lots of stuff that goes into standards, and there's some of that stuff may not actually be market relevant at a given point in time. So let's go back to the operators and say, okay, what do you want to deploy? Is it indoor small cells, or is it outdoor macro in a rural environment? Because those different applications of Open RAN have different architectures, they have different features, they have different carrier bands, different aspects of carrier aggregation. So let's work out what that is and define that. Define what those product requirements are to be able to support that. Now, that's a really interesting exercise because it helps to narrow our focus. If we were to try and deploy everything that Open RAN could do and try and define that, we would just be boiling the ocean and we wouldn't get anywhere. Open RAN is a journey, right? So let's focus at the beginning of the journey to make sure that we're targeting market relevance. At that point, once we have that combined list of operator requirements, which in itself is invaluable, we send that out to our vendor community, our participants, to say, what can you support in your products? What can you support now? What can you support in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? There's no point going through a process of trying to do testing in a lab on a 64 by 64 MIMO when you know that your community and there are no RUs out there that support that. So let's focus on what can be tested. But the responses that we get to those questions enable us to build an industry roadmap that we share with the community to show when that technology will be available. So we build out an industry roadmap of a number of different releases of the features and functionalities that products do support. And that's really important because then, as part of each release, that's what we focus our testing on. And that's what we can badge. And if we align that with what the operators are asking for in terms of market requirements, then we're starting to accelerate things into the market. It's a channel to market for vendors. That's the value there as well. So industry roadmaps are key functionality, and this is an ongoing process that we're going to be keeping driving throughout next year and beyond. Test and validation. We had a great question about the difference of the types of testing. Standards-based testing for performance testing of interfaces and functionality, fantastic. But considering that we're building up product requirements that go beyond that, based on the different types of deployment scenarios that the operators are looking for, different carrier aggregation, different band support, different power functionality, different coverage characteristics, everything to do with that, we developed that through our test and validation process, developing common test plans so that no matter where you test in a lab in Asia compared to a lab in North America, you're actually testing against the same level of criteria. And that's what we then badge against, so that you know that there's a common baseline for what we're doing. Now, let's be clear that this is still following the same kind of system validation that's been taking place for years with the incumbent vendors. But this is doing it more out in the open and exposing that, and really focusing down on what we can deliver and how we can accelerate that into market. And that's what the right-hand side is. The right-hand side is our tip marketplace, where we showcase what is available, right? If you were to go out there and say, right, I'm Telecom Dave, right? Telecom Dave wants to deploy Open RAN. Where do I go to find out what Open RAN systems work together? Currently, you can't do that. You have to go bilaterally and say, okay, vendor Andy, what does your solution look like? Does it work? Vendor Daniel, what does your solution look like? This is very, very time consuming. So the marketplace is the place where we want to centralize all of this different type of functionality to be the one-stop shop for systems that you can see that have been tested through this process. And inherently, if it's tested through the TIP process, it conforms to what the ORAN testing has done because they've done the standards-based testing beforehand, and we reference that in our testing architecture. So that's the focus areas of how we work, and there's going to be more of the same. We want to see more operator-driven blueprints that are coming through, and we're already working through those with the Middle East operators and another of other European operators as well. So we're driving those through, and you can see that in 2022. We had a number of different deliverables and product listings, and the numbers at the bottom of the screen here are just in the last year. So it's basically saying we're going to be doing more of the same. But what we have done is we've revamped our test and validation proposition to make it a little bit more relevant to that view of driving towards commercial scale. When Open RAN was first talked about in TIP in 2016, it was a case of, it's a proof of concept, can this work? So we did that, and we went out and we tested it. It was like, yeah, the proof of concept works. Okay, but then people were saying, well, can it work in a commercial environment? Oh, so we better go out and do some trials. So we did the trials, and the results came back, and it was like, yeah, it does work. Now it's the case of the POCs and the trials, they're done, right? They're not moving the needle anymore. Now we need to have a system, an industrialized approach of how we can gain commercial scale for this type of technology. So our badging system is related to that. Bronze badge, we talked about when vendors respond to the list of product requirements. If they respond to that, they get the bronze badge, they're RFI ready, they're on our TIP exchange. Means anybody can see what those results are from an operator perspective as well. So that also helps the operators in terms of issuing RFIs. If you look at the process that we have here, it's almost like TIP is issuing a common RFI for all of the operators and making those results available. Silver badge is doing that level of testing in a controlled environment, so that could be a lab or a field trial. And gold badge is, right, we've really done the complete commercial grade level of testing, performance, sustainability, reliability, everything that an operator would do in their own lab before they put it into a commercially live network. Now, the testing that we do here, it's never going to be 100% of the testing that every single operator is going to do, because no single operator's network is the same. But if we can do 80 to 90% of it, then we're saving 80 to 90% of the integration and the interoperability and the testing that every single operator has to do and is currently trying to do, because this is the way that everything used to work. And it's not going to work, and it's not going to help to achieve commercial scale moving forward. And this is the same from the vendor's perspective. Right? If a vendor, and it's great for them to try and get into every single operator's lab, because it's an opportunity for them that they may not have had before, because if they're not on the procurement list, they have no visibility. But they have visibility through this system. So this is what we're aiming to do. And doing this type of system testing is really important to do this based on continuous testing, right? We talked about defining different releases, and the contents of the releases is always going to be updated depending on what products can support and what requirements there are. So doing continuous testing of releases is really, really important. And I think that moving away from the plugfest, once or twice a year concept, we need to look at this system a little bit more. How can we automate that level of testing to get the results and binding in CI/CD processes and delivery ultimately into operators' staging areas themselves? So the model that we have here, we're starting to call the Open RAN Innovation Hub, the TIP Innovation Hub. Traffic light system on the left is where we were or still are with some monolithic incumbent vendor solutions. And let's not deny that has provided us a great platform for where we are today. Right? We've all got phones in our pockets that have been working great. We've got great levels of connectivity. Over half the world is connected. You know, I can call Daniel, who's in Spain, anytime, which he doesn't like because I keep waking him up in the evenings. But that model has worked. In a disaggregated world, we need to do something different. In the middle ground here is the view of, well, I have a disaggregated system approach, but I'm going to try and use the same level of testing and doing the bilateral testing that we've done in the past. And all that's doing is that we're having to duplicate testing in many different operators' labs, and it's showing the level of complexity of having to aggregate all this stuff together to the operators, and it's stretching the vendor ecosystem. So the way to do it better is to focus down on a number of different blueprints and configurations and test that through a centralized mechanism. And that's what the TIP Innovation Hub is focused on. Doing this on every single release to validate the system, to make sure that we're focusing on commercial grade. This is the way to accelerate commercial deployment of Open RAN. And the view here, test once, deploy many. That's our mantra, and that's where we want to get to. And that's where we're going to move forward to in the next year. So I hope you're ready to take part in that as well. Thank you.